Hi guys, Mimi G here. Today I'm going to do a video about something that I think is super important for you guys to know. So I get asked a ton of questions about sewing, and for those of you that don't know, I do have an online sewing and design school called sewitacademy.com where I teach people to sew from the very beginning and you build on your skills. But there are things that people try and learn on their own on YouTube and other places, and I'm so for that, right? There's so much content, even on my own YouTube, of free tutorials and things that you can learn. But what I do keep seeing is a lot of mistakes that need to be avoided, and it usually happens from new sewists. So I thought I would make a list of 11 mistakes that new sewists should avoid. So I made a list, I put it on my phone. Okay, so the very first one, super important, is overspending on your very first sewing machine. Now, I know that, especially me, when I get a new hobby, I want to buy all the things, okay? I want to buy everything that I need, even if I don't need it yet. And one of the things that I see is you start to learn to sew, or you become a member of the Sew It Academy and you want to go buy an expensive sewing machine. And, if you have the income, great. If you don't, and you're not even sure that you're gonna like it, then I always suggest that you buy a machine that is under $200. I have a list in the school in sewitacademy.com, so if you're a member, you can pull it up, and I have a list of recommended sewing machines, but I also have a link that I will put in the description box that covers all of the machines that I personally have worked on that are under $200, that I worked on for a long time. I sewed on a Brother machine that cost me $149 for 7 years. I made jeans on it, I made coats on it, I made all kinds of stuff. That is one of the things that I've seen newbies make, is spend too much money on either supplies and even, should I say it, fabric. Listen, I spend half my fortune on fabric. I buy fabric all the time. And that's one of the very first things that people want to go and buy is fabric. And you start hoarding all this fabric and it gets a little bit expensive. So don't overspend on tools and supplies when you first start to sew. Okay, the second thing is do not skip the stay stitching. If you've been sewing and you sew with patterns, you know what stay stitching is. Now, it's meant to keep necklines and seam lines from stretching out of shape, especially if you're adding like a collar to a neckline. People get lazy when they sew. Even I do it sometimes and go ahead and skip the stay stitching. But at this point, I've been sewing for over 20-something years, so I can get away with it. But if you're new to sewing, it's going to be critical, because if you skip it and then you're going to go and attach your collar to your neckline and it doesn't fit, that's because one or the other has stretched out. And I would bet to say that it's the neckline because you did not stay stitch. So don't be lazy and follow all the steps. Okay, third, skipping markings and notches. I know it's annoying, and a lot of times you think you don't need them, but they're there for a reason. Sewing patterns are like puzzles, okay? All of those notches, those dots, they tell you that these two pieces go together. So if you don't mark them, right? If you don't clip your notches and you don't mark your dots, and then you start trying to attach your sleeve to your shirt and it doesn't fit, and then you're frustrated and you're ripping your stitches out, that's because you didn't take time to mark all of your notches and all of your dots. Next up, not testing your needles on the fabric that you're about to use. Now, this is really important because, first of all, I know people who will sew with the same needle for like weeks and months, never changing that needle. That is crazy. I never use the same needle for more than maybe 3 or 4 projects. And if it's something that I really like something delicate, like a silk, I use a brand new needle. And you need to know the differences in all of these needles because they do make a difference in your stitching, especially if you're working with knits. Now, generally you would say, well, if I'm working with a knit, I would use either a ballpoint needle or a jersey needle. But they are different and they will work differently on the type of knit. So before you get started on whatever project it is, test your needle to whatever fabric you're using. Next up, ignoring grain lines. On every single pattern that you buy, that you go to work with, it has a grain line. That grain line tells you exactly how to place your pattern on your fabric. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because if you don't pay attention and you ignore that and you try to place that grain line on the cross grain, you're gonna get a wonky piece of fabric. Now, that is imperative, especially if you're doing something like a bias skirt or a bias top. You wanna make sure that your grain line is always parallel to the salvage edge of your fabric. Let's see, what else? Okay. Picking advanced fabrics. Now, if you're new to sewing, the last thing you should be doing is buying silks or chiffons or sequins or wool or anything that's expensive, first of all, and second, anything that's hard to work with, especially anything silky or slippery. It's gonna be a nightmare for you to work with. And yes, there are a whole ton of things that you can do to make that process easier. There's a lot of tips that I use when I'm cutting shears or I'm cutting slippery fabrics, but you're not there yet. You're just starting. So avoid the hassle, avoid the frustration, and avoid spending money on expensive fabrics that you're gonna ruin by cutting the wrong way. What else we got? Oh my God. Okay, I should have put this as number one because press your seams. If you have watched me for any length of time, go back to some of my videos, like some of my DIYs from like a year ago. I literally repeat myself over and over again. Sew a seam, press a seam. Sew a seam, press a seam. The first sign of your garment being home sewn is that you didn't properly press your seams. It seems like you're going to do more ironing than sewing, and that's probably true, but it makes such a difference in how your garment looks and also as you're sewing to make sure that everything is aligning right. So please, please, people, when you stitch a seam, press it out. All right, let's see what else we got. Oh, this is important. Picking your pattern size according to your retail size. So if you're new to sewing, you probably don't know this, but when people go and buy patterns, they generally go and buy them based on the size that they are in retail clothing, right? So I wear a size 4 pant, so I go and buy a 4 or 6 pattern thinking that's gonna fit me, and it's not, because pattern sizing is a whole nother beast and it has nothing to do with retail sizing. For example, I actually would buy a pair of pants, which generally would be between a 4 and a 6, depending on the brand that I'm buying. But in patterns, I have to cut a size 12 or a size 14. So please familiarize yourself with the differences in pattern sizing and always go based on your measurements and not the numeric sign that you're used to buying your clothing from. The other thing is washing your fabric before cutting. Okay. Now, not everybody likes to do that, and I will admit that I don't always do that. But if you're new to sewing, you want to make the most out of the fabric that you're buying, right? So I'll give you an example. You buy this great piece of knit fabric, and you make yourself a dress, and then after you wear it, you go and you wash it. Well, guess what? It shrunk. It shrunk, and now you're gonna try and wear it, and it's not gonna fit. And that will happen a lot with denim or cottons, all kinds of things. So although we don't necessarily like to do it all the time, and of course I would not suggest you doing this for things like silks and wools, take those to the dry cleaners, but if you're sewing at home and you're working with cottons or knits or denims, please pre-wash your fabric so that you can get all of that that's gonna shrink out, and that way you can cut your pattern, make your garment, and then know that when you wash it again, it's not gonna shrink on you. Super important, because you're gonna be really pissed off if you spend all this time making a garment and then you go and you wash it and then it doesn't fit. You know what I'm saying? And then the last thing is giving up. Okay, sewing can be really frustrating for some people, especially if you're trying to self-teach. Now, I'm not doing this to promo Sew It Academy, but I will say that in Sew It Academy, we do take that into consideration because we want you to learn with baby steps, and then we build sort of going on. Well, when you're self-teaching and you're just going, you know, you're turning on a YouTube video and you're like, yeah, let me go and make this skirt. Well, if you've never touched a sewing machine or you've never done any of this before, it can be really confusing and it can get really frustrating. And then, of course, you're gonna wanna give up. So take time to follow these simple little rules. And if you are teaching yourself, just be patient because it takes time. I was not born knowing how to sew. It took me years. The first couple of years that I started sewing garments for my body was terrible. Nothing fit. It just didn't look well. I didn't understand the patterns. So it took time and practice for me to get better and better. And so I promise you, just give yourself a little time and be patient. All right, guys. Leave your comments below if you have any questions or anything else you want me to talk about. I am happy to do so. Until next time, peace.